I'm 89 years old. I live alone in a small apartment that smells like laundry soap and old paper, and I've started talking to myself. It isn't because I like the sound of my own voice. It's because there are things I carried for so long that they've started to feel heavy in my mouth. I'm telling you this because I'm running out of days where my mind is clear. Some mornings a name is right there bright and easy. Other mornings it's just a shape. Forgetting is losing people twice. So this is what I understand. That's the truth, so. I kept choosing people who couldn't love me back because it felt familiar. It felt like home. When I was younger, I thought love was supposed to be difficult. I thought if it didn't hurt a little, it wasn't real. I wouldn't have said it like that then. I would have called it devotion. I would have called it patience. I would have called it being the kind of person who doesn't give up. I grew up in a house where affection was rare, like a special meal you only got on holidays. My father wasn't cruel. He just wasn't there, even when he was sitting at the table. He worked, he paid the bills, he came home smelling of metal and sweat, and he believed that was love. My mother moved through the days like she was always behind schedule. She was tired in a way a young person can't understand. I learned early not to ask for too much. Not too much attention, not too much comfort, not too much softness. If I wanted praise, I had to bring home good grades. If I wanted a smile, I had to be useful. So when I met my first love in my early 20s, it didn't occur to me to look for someone gentle. I looked for the same feeling I'd always known, reaching, waiting, trying. Her name was Elaine. She wore red lipstick even when she was just going to the grocery store. She laughed in a way that made other people laugh too, but she didn't laugh much around me, not at first. That became my mission, to be the one who could bring it out of her. We met at a diner where I worked nights while I took classes during the day. She came in with friends after a movie and looked at me like I was part of the furniture. And that did something to me. It made me want to prove I was. I brought her extra napkins. I refilled her coffee before it was empty. I memorized what she ordered. When she finally noticed me, it felt like I'd won something. I didn't call it a warning, I called it chemistry. The first years with Elaine were a quiet kind of chasing. She wasn't unkind. She just kept herself at a distance. When I reached for her hand in public, sometimes she'd let me, sometimes she wouldn't. When I told her I missed her, she'd say, "You're sweet," like it was a compliment, not an answer. We got married because that's what people did then. City Hall on a Wednesday. My mother cried. Elaine smiled politely in the pictures, the way someone smiles when they're being photographed for a passport. That should have broken my heart. Instead, I told myself she was private. I told myself she'd open up with time. Time was the thing I always gave away like it was endless. I worked like a man trying to outrun a feeling. I stayed late because staying late meant I didn't have to come home to the silence between us. I brought home paychecks and groceries, and I fixed things around the house because the things I wanted couldn't be fixed with a wrench. Elaine would sit at the kitchen table reading magazines and say, "You don't have to fuss," but she never said, "I'm glad you're here." When I tried to talk about us, she'd look past me. Sometimes she'd say, "Why are you making everything serious?" Sometimes she'd say nothing at all. Little moments piled up. I remember the sound of my own key in the lock back then. I would pause outside the door for a second, breathing in, like I could prepare myself. I'd step inside, and the house would be warm, but not welcoming. Elaine would be moving around without looking up. I'd say hi, she'd say hi, and keep doing what she was doing. I started timing my stories. If I talked too long about my day, she'd drift away, so I learned to trim myself down. Work was fine, traffic was bad, nothing much. I became a man of small sentences because small sentences didn't get rejected. Even our arguments were quiet. It was more like I'd ask a question and she'd answer with her back turned. "Are you happy? I'm tired. Do you still want this? Why are we doing this now?" I'd stand there, feeling foolish for bringing it up, and I'd apologize for the wrong thing. "Sorry, I didn't mean to start something." And she'd accept the apology like it was a payment. One winter evening, I came home tired and said, Could you just sit with me for a minute? I wasn't asking for a speech. I just wanted another body beside mine. She stood in the doorway with her coat on and said, I'm meeting Carol, I told you. I said okay, and she left. I sat on the couch and stared at the blank television screen because the room felt too quiet. I remember thinking, this is what marriage is. You get used to it. You get used to it is a sentence that can ruin a life. We never had children. She said she wasn't sure she wanted them, and I didn't push. Part of me wanted to, but part of me was relieved. I was afraid of becoming my father. I didn't have the language for that fear, so I called it practicality. In my 40s, Elaine started staying out later. It wasn't a scandal I could point to and hate. It was a gradual shifting, like someone moving furniture out of a room piece by piece, until one day you realize there's nowhere left to sit. One morning I found a note on the counter, 2 lines, I need space, don't call. I stared at that note for a long time, like if I stared hard enough, I could pull more meaning out of it. All I pulled out was the truth. She didn't miss me the way I missed her. When she came back to collect clothes, she looked around the house like it belonged to someone else. I tried to touch her shoulder, and she flinched. She said, you're a good man. Then she said, but I can't be what you want. And I nodded, like that made it reasonable. After the note, after she left, people told me I was better off. They meant well, but being better off isn't the same as being loved. I remember grocery shopping alone the first time, pushing the cart through aisles I'd walked with her for years. I reached for her favorite tea without thinking, and then stood there holding the box like it was evidence of a life that had been erased. At night, I would replay conversations, trying to find the exact sentence that broke us. That's what you do when you've been trained to believe love is earned. You assume there was a test, and you failed it. I went to work and did my job and nodded at people and laughed at the right places. Then I'd come home and eat standing at the counter because setting the table for one felt like too much truth. I told myself she would miss me. She didn't. After Elaine, you'd think I would have learned. But I chose the same shape again, just in different clothing. People who liked me best when I was helpful, quiet, and easy. I dated a woman in my late 50s who let me do little errands and repairs, and she thanked me kindly, but she never made space for me. I dated another in my 70s who called when she wanted to talk and disappeared when I wanted to be close. None of them were monsters. That's what makes it harder. They weren't doing something dramatic. They just weren't able or willing to give what I was hungry for. The slow cost of all of this wasn't one big heartbreak. It was 1,000 small withdrawals. It was eating dinner alone in restaurants that were loud with other people's conversations. It was keeping my voice low on the phone because I didn't want the neighbors to hear me sounding needy. It was keeping a second pillow on the bed even when no one used it, because removing it felt like admitting the truth. It was missing my sisters last Christmas because I didn't want to disappoint a woman who wouldn't have missed me if I stayed home. My sister died the next spring. I never told her what I traded away for that. It was letting friendships fade because I was always on call for someone who wasn't on call for me. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, like most endings are. With Ruth, I made the same mistakes in older hands. I took her to the same restaurant on the corner because she liked the soup. I learned which waiter she trusted. I kept a spare umbrella in my car because she always forgot hers. I was proud of how attentive I was, like attention was a substitute for belonging. Once on my birthday, I asked if she wanted to come over for cake. Not a party, just cake and coffee. She said, I've already made plans. I said, another night. She said, we'll see, and then she kissed my cheek like you kiss a relative. I ate the cake alone. The frosting tasted too sweet. I threw the rest away the next morning because I didn't want to look at it. After her illness call, I did what I always did. I stayed quiet. I didn't argue. I didn't demand. I hung up politely and sat there, but something in me was exhausted. I didn't have the energy to keep explaining my own existence to someone. A week later, I sent her a short card. No drama, just, I'm here if you want me. She never replied. That was the end, not a fight, not a scene, just absence doing what absence always does. And then the days got very simple. You don't notice how many of your choices are built around another person until there isn't one. I stopped cooking real meals because there was no one to share them with. I ate toast. I ate canned soup. I ate whatever took the least effort. My joints started hurting more, and I couldn't tell if it was age or the quiet. Some afternoons I'd sit by the window and watch people hurry past, hands linked, annoyed, laughing, alive. In my life, so much happened behind closed doors, inside my chest, where no one could see it and no one could answer it. It happened with the last woman I loved. Her name was Ruth. She was charming and sad in the way that makes you want to take care of someone. I listened to her stories. I paid for dinners. I showed up. She let me do those things, and she kept me outside her life like you keep a neighbor outside your front door. Then she got sick. She called me one afternoon, voice thin, and told me it was serious. I said, I'm coming over. There was a pause, then she said, no. She said her daughter was coming. She said she didn't want anyone else there. I said, I just want to sit with you. She said, please don't make this about you. That sentence landed in me like a cold object. Because I realized, in that moment, that I wasn't part of her crisis. I was an accessory to her calmer days. After that call, I sat at my kitchen table and looked at my hands. They were spotted and thin. I thought about how many years I'd spent making myself small enough to be acceptable to people who were never going to hold me. And something in me finally shifted, not into anger, into clarity. I thought about my mother, always tired. About my father, present in the room and absent in every other way. About how love, for me, had always been something you earned by being quiet and useful and not asking for too much. So of course, I kept choosing people who couldn't love me back. That kind of love didn't feel like rejection. It felt normal. If someone offered warmth freely, it made me suspicious. If someone wanted me the way I wanted them, it felt strange, like a coat that didn't fit. I didn't know how to wear it. I understand now that I wasn't drawn to distance because distance was exciting. I was drawn to it because it matched the shape of my childhood. I knew how to live in that space. I knew how to hope there. I knew how to wait. And waiting gave me a job. If I was waiting, I didn't have to face the harder thing, that maybe I was afraid of being loved, because being loved would have forced me to show up as myself, not as a service. Now at 89, the things that can't be fixed are simple and brutal. Elaine died 2 years ago. I found out from a mutual friend who called like she was delivering weather. Elaine passed last week, she said. I sat down and said, oh. I didn't cry at first. I just felt hollow. I realized there would never be a moment where she turned back and said, I should have held you. There would never be closure because most lives just stop. My sister is gone. Some friends are gone. And the ones still here have their own aches, their own grandchildren's birthdays to attend. And I'm here with my old habits, the habit of keeping quiet, the habit of not asking, the habit of making myself easy to ignore. Sometimes I try to picture my younger self, standing in that diner, watching Elaine like she was a prize. I want to reach across the years and say, you don't have to audition for love. But I can't reach him, I can only speak to you. If you're listening to an old man talk like this, maybe it's because you recognize something. Maybe you've sat by your phone waiting for a message that doesn't come. Maybe you've turned yourself into whatever someone seemed to like, hoping that if you got it right, they would finally choose you. I'll just tell you what I wish I had known. If you have to keep proving you deserve a place in someone's life, you probably don't have one. If you keep shrinking your needs so you don't scare someone away, you'll eventually shrink into a person you don't recognize. And if you're always drawn to people who keep you at arm's length, ask yourself, quietly, honestly, what that distance reminds you of, who made you feel like love was something you had to earn. There were people who offered me simple kindness over the years. A neighbor who brought soup when I had the flu. A coworker who once said, "You deserve someone who's glad you walked in." I smiled and changed the subject. I didn't know how to accept a sentence like that. I wonder what my life would have looked like if I had. Not perfect, just different. Maybe I would have had one person who sat beside me without me asking for it. Maybe I would have learned to stop calling pain familiar and calling familiarity love. I can't redo it. That's the cruel part. Understanding comes at the end when the calendar is mostly crossed out. All I have left is honesty. If this meant something to you, if it stirred something you've been trying not to look at, you can leave a few words. Not for me to feel important, just so you know you said it out loud somewhere. Tonight I'll wash my cup, turn off the light, and lie down in a bed that has only one warm spot. And I'll think about the years I spent waiting for people who couldn't love me back. Just with that quiet, late understanding that I mistook longing for love, and I can't get the time back.